Vane Thorne, the ruthless king of a hypermodern metropolis, has spent his life building a concrete empire where only what can be seen and touched matters. He rules with cold logic and absolute authority, believing he has conquered every corner of his city. However, during the demolition of an ancient, forgotten district, he encounters Elara, a ghost and an outcast from a century ago whom only he can see. As Vane's obsession with this spectral woman grows, his corporate allies begin to view him as a liability. The story follows Vane as he realizes that while he governs the city's skyline, this ethereal outcast governs his soul. He must eventually decide if he will remain a king of a hollow world or surrender his power to protect a love that exists beyond the veil of death. The silence in the room changed. It was no longer the silence of power, it was the silence of a secret. Vane Thorne ruled the city, but as the ghostly woman took a step toward him, he realized he no longer ruled himself. Vane didn't sleep that night. The memory of the blue glow burned behind his eyelids, making his expensive silk sheets feel like sandpaper. By morning, he had convinced himself it was a hallucination. He needed to focus on reality, and reality was the old sector demolition. He arrived at the site in a sleek black car that looked like a shark cutting through the dusty streets. The old sector was a place of crumbling brick and rusted iron, a scar on the face of his perfect city. "Tear it down," Vane commanded as he stepped out. "Every brick. Every memory. We will start building the new towers by noon." The heavy machines roared to life. A massive wrecking ball swung toward the shell of an old library, a building that had stood since the city was founded. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and ancient dust. Vane watched with his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold stone. This was how he maintained his power, by destroying the old to make room for the new. But then, the machine stopped. The roar of the engines died down into a confused hum. Vane stormed toward the foreman, his boots clicking loudly on the debris. "Why have we stopped thousands? I'm losing dollars every minute." "Sir, there's someone in there," the foreman stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the library entrance. "We tried to get her out, but the men, they're spooked." Vane pushed past the workers, ready to scream at whatever squatter was delaying his progress. He stepped into the shadow of the library, the air suddenly dropping 20 degrees. The dust in the air didn't settle, it swirled in strange, glowing patterns. There, standing directly under the path of the wrecking ball, was Elara. In the harsh daylight, she looked even more impossible. The sunlight passed right through her, casting no shadow on the cracked marble floor. She was touching a pile of ruined books, her translucent fingers moving as if she could still feel the paper. "You," Vane whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in a decade. Elara turned. She didn't look afraid of the giant machines or the man who owned them. She looked disappointed. "You build so much," she said, her voice sounding like a distant echo in a deep well. "But you understand so little, Vane Thorne." "This is my land," Vane snapped, trying to regain his grip on his world. "You're trespassing. You aren't even real." Elara stepped closer. As she moved, the ghosts of the past seemed to flicker around her, the sound of phantom children laughing, the smell of ink, the warmth of a fireplace that had been cold for a century. She stopped inches from him. Vane could see the individual sparks of blue light that made up her skin. "The city remembers what you choose to forget," she whispered. Vane looked back at his workers. They were standing perfectly still, staring at the empty air where Elara stood. They couldn't see her. To them, their boss was arguing with a ghost of his own making. Vane looked at the wrecking ball, then back at the woman who ruled the ruins. If he swung that hammer, he wasn't just breaking a building, he was breaking the only thing that had made him feel alive in years. Vane stood in the dust for a long time, staring at the empty air where Elara had been. To the construction crew, he looked like a man who had seen a terrifying vision. He eventually signaled for the machines to stay silent and walked back to his car without saying another word. By the time he reached the Thorne Tower, the rumors had already traveled faster than he had. In the high-tech boardroom, the air was thick with tension. Vane's top advisors and business rivals sit around a table made of dark glass. At the head of the table sat Marcus Crane, a man with a smile as sharp as a razor who had been waiting for Vane to make a mistake for years. "Vane," Marcus said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "We heard the demolition has stopped. The workers are saying you were talking to the wind. They say you looked afraid." Vane sat down, his tailored black suit still dusty from the ruins. He tried to put on his king face, the one that made grown men tremble. The site wasn't secure. "I'm handling it." But as he spoke, he felt a familiar chill. A soft, blue glow reflected in the polished surface of the boardroom table. He looked up, and his heart skipped a beat. Elara was sitting in an empty chair right next to Marcus. She was leaning back, her ghostly white hair draped over the back of the seat, watching the men with a look of quiet pity. Vane's eyes widened. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. "Is there something on my face, Vane?" Marcus asked, leaning forward. He followed Vane's gaze to the empty chair, seeing nothing but expensive leather. "No," Vane forced out, his forehead breaking into a sweat. Elara stood up and began to walk around the table. She passed right through Marcus, who shivered and rubbed his arms, looking confused by the sudden draft. She stopped behind Vane and placed a translucent hand near his shoulder. Vane could feel the cold fire of her presence, a tingle that made the hair on his neck stand up. "They are vultures, Vane," her echoing voice whispered in his ear. "They only love the gold you give them. Not the man you are." Vane gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. He was the only witness to a miracle, and a nightmare. If he reacted to her, Marcus would call him insane and take his company. If he ignored her, he felt like he was losing the only real thing he had ever found. "Vane? You're shaking," Marcus noted, a small, hungry grin forming on his lips. "Perhaps the king needs a vacation. You seem to be losing your grip on reality." Vane looked at Marcus, then looked at the beautiful, glowing outcast. He realized then that his secret was a heavy crown. He was the ruler of a city of millions, but he was now completely alone in a world that only he and a ghost inhabited. Vane retreated to his penthouse, the highest point in the city, where the walls were nothing but glass and the world looked like a glowing circuit board. He locked the heavy doors, needing a moment of absolute silence. But even in the luxury of his private sanctuary, he wasn't alone. Elara was there, standing by a telescope that pointed toward the stars. She looked like a smudge of blue ink on a clean white page. "Why me?" Vane asked, his voice cracking. He didn't look at her, he looked at his own reflection in the window. Out of all the people in this city, the historians, the poets, the dreamers, why follow the man who wanted to tear your home down? Elara moved toward him, her feet making no sound on the marble floor. "Because you are the loneliest of them all, Vane Thorne. The others see the past as a story. You see it as an enemy. You fight so hard to stay in the light of your neon signs because you are terrified of the dark." Vane turned to face her. "I'm not terrified. I'm practical. The dark has nothing to offer me." "The dark is where the heart speaks," she countered gently. She raised a hand, and as she moved, the lights in the penthouse began to flicker and dim. The sharp, white LED lamps died out, replaced by a soft, rhythmic pulsing of blue light that matched her aura. Vane watched, mesmerized, as the shadows in the room began to take shape. They weren't scary, they were memories. On the walls of his modern apartment, he saw the shadows of the old sector as it used to be, horse-drawn carriages, gas lamps, and people dancing in the library he had tried to destroy. It was a language of shadows, a silent movie played out on his walls. "This is what you're erasing," Elara whispered. "Not just brick and mortar. You're erasing the soul of the city to build a tomb of glass." Vane reached out, his fingers passing through a shadow of a blooming flower on the wall. It felt like a cold breeze against his skin. For the first time, he didn't think about profit margins or construction deadlocks. He thought about the lives that had come before him. "I can't save the past, Elara," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm a man of the future." "Then bring the heart into the future," she said. She stepped closer, and for a second, the air between them felt thick, like the moment before a lightning strike. You rule the city, Vane. But who rules you? Vane looked into her pale, glowing eyes and realized the answer. The glitch was no longer a mistake, it was the only thing making sense in a world that suddenly felt very cold and very empty. He was a king who had finally found a queen, even if she was made of nothing but mist and memory. The next morning, the air in the Thorne Tower felt different. It was no longer the hum of a busy beehive, it was the silence of a trap being set. Vane walked through the lobby, and for the first time, he noticed his security guards wouldn't look him in the eye. He stepped into the boardroom, but the seats were already filled. Marcus Crane stood at the head of the table, holding a thick stack of medical reports and financial statements. Beside him sat the company's lawyers, their faces as expressionless as statues. Vane, sit down, Marcus said, though it wasn't an invitation. It was a command. We've reviewed the footage from the demolition site. We've also talked to your staff about the conversations you've been having with empty chairs. Vane felt a surge of his old anger. I am the owner of this company. I don't answer to you, Marcus. You answer to the board, Marcus snapped, slamming a tablet onto the glass table. It showed a video of Vane in the ruins, gesturing wildly at nothing, his face twisted in a look of desperate longing. The shareholders are terrified. They think the king of the city has lost his mind. They think you're unfit to lead. Vane opened his mouth to defend himself, but he felt a sudden, familiar chill. Elara appeared, standing behind Marcus. She didn't look like a soft memory anymore. Her blue aura was flickering like a dying candle, her expression one of deep alarm. Don't let them see you look at me, she whispered, her voice a frantic echo in his mind. Vane, focus on the room. Stay in their world. Vane tried. He gripped his pen until his knuckles turned white, staring straight at Marcus's tie. The project is on schedule. My private life is none of your concern. It becomes our concern when you stop a multi-billion-dollar project because you're arguing with a ghost. Marcus shouted. He reported to the lawyers. We are voting to remove you as CEO, effective immediately. We've already secured the majority. You're out, Vane. The city needs a ruler who lives in the real world. The room blurred. Vane looked around at the men he had hired, the people he had made rich. Every single one of them looked away. In their eyes, he was no longer a king, he was a broken machine. Vane felt his empire slipping through his fingers like sand. He looked at Elara. She was reaching out to him, her face filled with sorrow. He realized that the more he loved the ghost, the more he became a ghost to his own people. Is it true? Marcus asked, his voice dropping to a low, mocking hiss. Are you really seeing things, Vane? Or are you just a coward hiding from the world you built? Vane looked from the cold, greedy eyes of Marcus to the warm, glowing eyes of Elara. He was at a crossroads. He could lie and save his crown, or he could tell the truth and lose everything. Vane left the tower not with a shout, but with a heavy, hollow silence. He didn't take the car. He walked until his expensive leather shoes were stained with the mud of the old sector. He found Elara waiting for him beneath the skeletal remains of the library. The wrecking ball hung motionless above them like a frozen moon. I lost it, Vane said, his voice disappearing into the vast, empty room. The chair, the title, the tower. I have nothing left. You have yourself, Elara said, her voice softer than the settling dust. For the first time in 30 years, you are just Vane. She sat on a fallen stone pillar and patted the space beside her. When Vane sat, he felt a strange vibration, not quite heat, not quite cold, radiating from her. I wasn't always a ghost, she began, her blue aura pulsing slowly. 100 years ago, I lived in this district. I didn't have a family or a name that mattered. I was an outcast, a girl who gathered scraps and told stories to the children who had no books. I loved this city when it was just wood and hope. Vane watched as she looked up at the ceiling. There was a man back then, much like you. He wanted to pave over the gardens and the libraries to build his factories. He called it progress. I stood exactly where we are sitting now, trying to stop the fires they set to clear the land. Her eyes grew dim, the blue light fading to a dark gray. The smoke took my breath, and the city forgot my name before the ashes were even cold. I became a ghost because I died unloved in a place that chose gold over people. I was tied to these ruins because I couldn't bear to see the heart of the city die completely. Vane reached out. For the first time, he didn't pull his hand back when he felt the chill. You stayed to protect the memories. I stayed because I was waiting, she whispered, looking directly at him. I was waiting for someone to finally see that a city isn't made of stone. It's made of the people who love it. I was an outcast in life, and you became an outcast in your own tower. We are the same, Vane. Vane looked at his hands. They were dirty, scratched, and empty of power. Yet, as he sat in the ruins with the woman the world had forgotten, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had spent his life building walls to keep people out, only to realize he had accidentally locked himself in. I'm sorry, Vane whispered. I'm sorry I tried to tear it down. Elara smiled, and for a moment, the blue light was so bright it filled the entire room like a sunrise. You didn't tear it down, Vane. You woke it up. Vane spent the next few days wandering the city as a ghost himself. Without his suit, his car, or his title, nobody recognized the man who had once ruled the skyline. He watched people rushing to work, their eyes glued to their phones, chasing the same hollow dreams he once had. He realized that when he had everything, he was actually blind. He had seen the price of everything, but the value of nothing. He returned to his penthouse one last time to collect a few things. The electricity had been cut off by Marcus and the board, leaving the vast apartment in shadows. But Vane didn't need the lights. I can see better in the dark, Vane muttered to himself. That is because you are finally looking with your heart, Elara's voice echoed. She appeared through the window, her blue light reflecting off the dark glass. The world tells you that love is blind, Vane. But they have it backward. It is greed that is blind. Love is the only thing that actually sees. Vane walked toward her. In the past, he would have been calculating his next move to regain his company. Now, he didn't care about the towers or the stocks. He looked at Elara, really looked at her. He saw the way her form hummed with the history of 1,000 forgotten souls. He saw the kindness in her eyes that no amount of money could buy. I spent my life building a vision of the future, Vane said, standing inches from her. But I was blind to the person standing right in front of me. I was blind to the pain I was causing by erasing the past. He reached out his hand. Usually, he was careful not to touch her, afraid of the cold sting of the veil between them. This time, he didn't hesitate. He pressed his palm toward her cheek. He couldn't feel the warmth of skin, but he felt a profound, electric connection, a hum of energy that told him she was more real than the steel building they stood in. I don't want the city anymore, Elara, he whispered. I don't want to rule. I just want to stay in this moment, where the world is quiet and I can finally see. Outside, a low rumble of thunder shook the floor. The sky was turning a bruised purple, and the first heavy drops of a storm began to pelt the glass. Vane knew the real world was coming for him. Marcus and the lawyers were coming to take his keys and his name. But as he stood in the dark with the ghostly woman who ruled his heart, he realized he had never felt more like a king. He wasn't a king of buildings anymore. He was a king of his own soul. The storm didn't just arrive, he attacked. Massive bolts of lightning cracked open the sky, turning the dark metropolis into a world of flickering white and deep shadow. High atop the Thorne Tower, the wind howled against the glass like a wounded animal. Inside the darkened penthouse, the air was heavy with the smell of ozone and the electric hum of the coming climax. Vane stood at the center of the room, his soaked black suit clinging to his frame. He looked nothing like the polished king who had walked these halls a week ago. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck. Suddenly, the heavy doors to the penthouse were thrown open. Marcus Crane marched in, flanked by 2 men in raincoats. They carried legal documents and a medical team. Marcus looked around the dark room, his face twisted in a sneer. Look at you, Vane. Sitting in the dark, talking to shadows. We're here to end this. Sign these papers, and we'll get you the help you clearly need. Otherwise, we'll have you removed by force. Vane didn't turn around. He was looking at Elara. In the flashes of lightning, she appeared more vivid than ever, a bright, spectral blue against the storm. The help I need isn't in those papers, Marcus, Vane said, his voice calm and steady. I spent my life building a throne for a man who didn't exist. You can have the chair. You can have the tower. They were never real anyway. He's far gone, Marcus muttered to the men beside him. He's talking to the air again. As Marcus stepped forward to grab Vane's arm, the temperature in the room plummeted. The rain outside began to swirl in a violent circle around the top of the building. Elara stepped between them, her hair whipping in an invisible wind. Her blue aura flared, pushing back the darkness. You think you're taking his power? Elara's voice didn't just echo, it vibrated through the floorboards. Marcus froze, his hand trembling as he felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. He couldn't see her, but he could feel the weight of a century of forgotten souls standing in the room. Get out, Vane said, finally turning to face his rival. His eyes weren't filled with the cold greed of a businessman anymore. They were filled with the fire of a man who had seen the truth. The city isn't yours to rule. It belongs to the people who love it. And you love nothing. A massive clap of thunder shook the entire skyscraper, shattering one of the decorative glass vases on the table. Terrified by the sudden supernatural energy in the room, the men behind Marcus backed away. Marcus looked at Vane's face, at the raw, unbreakable strength there, and realized he couldn't break this man. Vane had already surrendered everything Marcus wanted to take. You're a fool, Vane, Marcus spat, though his voice shook. You'll die alone in the dark with nothing but your ghosts. I've never been less alone, Vane replied. The penthouse doors slammed shut as Marcus and his men fled into the night, leaving Vane in the center of the storm. He walked out onto the rooftop observation deck, stepping into the full fury of the downpour. The rain soaked through his tailored suit, weighing him down, but Vane had never felt lighter. Behind him, the city stretched out in a sea of neon, but he didn't look back. He stood at the very edge of the skyscraper, the wind roaring in his ears. Vane. The voice was closer than it had ever been. He turned and saw Elara standing in the center of the helipad. In the middle of the lightning and the rain, she was a pillar of soft, steady blue light. She looked at him with a love so deep it seemed to bridge the 100 years between them. Vane took a step toward her, his boots splashing in the puddles. They're gone. Everything is gone. There is no more king of the city. Then who are you now? She asked gently. Vane stopped just inches from her. He reached out, his hand trembling. Instead of stopping at the surface, he did something he had been terrified to do since the day they met. He pushed his hand forward, through the shimmering light of her gown, until his fingers disappeared into her chest. The world stopped. The rain seemed to hang in midair. The roar of the wind faded into a rhythmic, pulsing thrum. Vane didn't feel the cold of a ghost, he felt a sudden, overwhelming heat. It was the feeling of every heart that had ever loved in this city, the hope, the sacrifice, the memory of Elara herself. Elara reached out and mirrored her movement. Her translucent hand passed through the fabric of his wet suit, sinking deep into his chest. Vane gasped, his eyes flying open wide. He felt her fingers brush against his very soul, a touch that was more real than any physical embrace. It was the moment the title had promised. He ruled the city of stone, but she finally, completely, ruled his heart. I see it, Vane whispered, tears mixing with the rain on his face. I see the heart of the city. I see you. Love is blind, Vane, she whispered back, her face inches from him. Because it doesn't need eyes to see what truly matters. In that moment, the barrier between the living and the dead didn't matter. The crown was gone, the money was gone, and the tower was just a pile of steel. There was only the outcast and the man who had found his way home through the dark. As a final bolt of lightning illuminated the sky, the two figures stood as one, a ruler and a ghost, finally connected in the only way that lasted forever. Weeks later, the dust in the old sector had finally settled, but not because of wrecking balls. The machines were gone, replaced by small groups of people planting gardens and restoring the old stone library. The Thorne Towers project was dead, and in its place, something far more beautiful was breathing. Vane Thorne walked the streets of the district at twilight. He no longer wore the tailored black suits that had been his armor. Instead, he wore a simple coat, his face relaxed and his eyes clear. He had lost his company, his billions, and his seat at the top of the world, but he didn't look like a man who had failed. He looked like a man who had finally woken up from a long, cold dream. He stopped in front of the library, where the first gas lamps were being relit. He wasn't the king here. To the people working on the ruins, he was just a man who had used his remaining influence to protect their history. He was a silent protector, a sovereign of the shadows. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the neon lights of the distant city center flickered on, but Vane didn't look at them. He looked at the seat beside him on a wooden bench. A soft, blue glow appeared. Elara sat there, her tattered Victorian gown shimmering like silk in the moonlight. She wasn't a glitch to him anymore, she was his constant companion. While the rest of the world saw an empty bench, Vane saw the woman who had saved his soul. "They're happy," Vane said, watching a group of neighbors share a meal in the new park. "The city feels alive again." "It's because it has a heart to beat for," Elara replied, her voice like a gentle breeze. She leaned her head toward his shoulder. Though her weight was nothing more than a chill, Vane felt the immense strength of her presence. Vane looked up at the skyscraper he used to own. It was a dark pillar of glass, cold and lonely. He realized then that he had traded a kingdom of stone for a kingdom of spirit. He was an outcast now, just like her, forgotten by the powerful men in the boardrooms. But as he reached out and felt the tingle of Elara's spectral hand in his, he knew he was the richest man in the world. He had ruled the city, but she ruled his heart. And in that quiet, forgotten corner of the world, that was more than enough.